I appreciate the opportunity to testify. My name is Steve Howard. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont State Employees Association. And Madam Chair, what I want to do, I do have some results of our unit leadership's brainstorming around the challenges facing the Department of Corrections in relation to staffing and the staffing crisis. I do want to sort of set the table a little bit just to make sure it's just very clear what our role is. So it's our view that it's the Scott administration's job to run the Department of Corrections properly. It's the legislature's job to make sure they do run it properly. And it's the VSEA's job to make sure that our members' voices are heard from the front lines in that department, and to tell you when we think it's not being run properly. So that is what we have been trying to do. But we want to make it clear that VSEA, while we have put some ideas on the table, we have done that with the management. We've tried to do that with the governor directly at times and with the legislature. VSEA does not run the Department of Corrections. That is not our job. It is, in fact, the governor's job to run the Department of Corrections. So I just want to start by before I go into the brainstorming of some solutions, I want to set the table a little bit in terms of what the problem is today. We all know that there is a pervasive staffing crisis, but I have some numbers that I want to share with you because we've been talking to the legislature, about 5 or 6 years ago. We started to come to the legislature to say there is a growing staffing crisis that needs to be addressed. We are still in the midst of that crisis, and it's getting deeper and worse. And I just want to give you some data before I go through the ideas that our members have put together. I have to say that we, over those 5 years, have made progress from time to time by entering at the bargaining table into side letters of agreement with the administration. They have started to show promise, started to show progress, and those agreements have been yanked by the administration. And so we are going to repeat some of what we saw as successful in that process because we think the history shows that those efforts did bear fruit and could help us impact this in a positive way. But I just want to give you some data from March 2024 to November 2024, which is the latest data that we could get from the Department of Human Resources. The total number of vacancies among COs has doubled from 40 to 81 during that time, a massive growth in the number of vacancies. And I want to tell you about a couple of particular facilities where it is very pronounced. So in the chair's district at Southern State Correctional Facility, they have a 41% vacancy rate. 41% vacancy rate, an increase of 256% since March. At the women's facility, the rate has nearly doubled from 16% to 29%. Other facilities are not far off from those two facilities that seem to have the most pronounced growth in vacancies that are resulting in our members working 16-hour shift after 16-hour shift after 16-hour shift. They are exhausted, they are burnt out, and they are fed up. So it's gotten so bad that our field department has now counted up to 6 calls, we know there are more, of members who have called us to report that they haven't gotten bathroom breaks. And during that time, they obviously had to change their uniforms. We have received phone calls from members increasingly telling us that they're falling asleep on their way home after a 16-hour shift. The other day, I received a call from a wife of a CO who called to tell me that she calls her husband when he leaves the facility to talk to him so that he doesn't fall asleep on his hour commute home. And on this particular day when she called, he fell asleep while she was talking to him on the phone and drove off the side of the road. So I'm really not supposed to say that the sky is falling. I've been told not to do that. I will leave it up to you to decide whether the sky is falling. I personally, as a Vermonter and a taxpayer, find this unconscionable and unacceptable. And so I'm sure that many people in the room share that view. So what do we do about it? We have some ideas. And I just want to start by saying the VSEA is not asking the legislature to get involved in collective bargaining. We do not want the legislature involved in collective bargaining, and we are not asking the legislature for any of these things to take any actions on anything that would be bargainable. But the fact remains that the number one solution to this problem is for the governor to come to the table and to bargain with the members of the VSEA to increase the pay and the benefits of the folks who are working on the front lines in security positions in corrections, and to incentivize other folks in corrections to help cover the overtime. So we know double time on days off was very effective. We know incentives to the field are very effective. We know that in this economic circumstance Vermont is in, despite the great work of the legislature on the child care bill, that we are ways off from having available and affordable child care. Providing child care would be, in this instance, a huge incentive for more people to come work for the Department of Corrections just for that benefit, which they can't find anywhere else, and to help these 24/7 facilities keep the staff that they have, many of whom are single parents. Probably the most incompatible work schedule of any parent, much less a single parent, but we have many single parents who are working on the front lines in corrections. Secondly, and you've heard those folks on probably in this committee and on the committees of jurisdiction have heard me say this before, our members believe that the managers who are working in central office, who were trained at taxpayers' expense to work in a facility or in the field, need in this emergency to be assigned to the facilities and to the field to relieve the pressure on the frontline workers. Now, we know that's a managerial decision, but we also know that you're all very powerful, persuasive, and influential Vermonters. And we are asking you to bring this to the commissioner and to use whatever pressure, influence, and persuasion you can to make this a reality. There is a giant disconnect between central office management and the frontline workers. This would be a major step forward in alleviating the pressure in the crisis, but also building a bond that does not exist now between the managers in central office and the folks on the front lines working the 16-hour shifts, sitting in hospitals, away from their family and away from their lives. The legislature could take action in the next General Assembly to align Group G, which is the 20-year, the retirement at age 55, the plan that the VSEA successfully fought for in the last round of negotiations and legislating around the pension. You could align Group G with Group C, which is what the state police have and what sworn law enforcement officers have. That would reduce the contribution rates. It would also allow for a 20-year retirement at age 50 rather than a 20-year retirement at age 55. That is something the legislature could do. It's not bargainable. It's all driven by statute, and it's in the purview of the legislature. One of the things that came out very clearly from our members in the September statewide labor management meeting we had with the commissioner and his management team, and in discussions with the members preparing for this meeting, is we have to tell people the truth. There is no work-life balance currently in the Department of Corrections. And while the goals of the new schedule the commissioner put out, the 2-2-3 schedule, are admirable and goals that we support, we are not there yet. So when you tell people they're going to have a work-life balance, and you tell them they're going to be paid what they were paid under the previous side letter that expired, and they both don't get the work-life balance and they don't get what they were told when they were hired, they leave. And they are leaving in large numbers because they feel like they were not being told the truth. There was a lot of talk in the last meeting from the commissioner about the 2-2-3 schedule in the state of Texas. And I talked to our members about it. And they said, yeah, it's great that Texas has the 2-2-3 schedule in their correction system, but they have a completely different system for supervision. They have an indirect system of supervision, which is very different from the very labor-intensive system that we use in the Vermont correctional system. So it's sort of deceiving to say that those are apples and apples. It's apples and oranges, and maybe the department wants to consider a less labor-intensive indirect supervision model the way they are working in Texas. Our members also believe that in the 12 and 16 hours that they are working in these facilities day after day, that there should be some rotation out of the most demanding units. So, for instance, the mental health unit, which is at Springfield, it's a very demanding assignment. So, staying there for 16 hours takes a toll on people, and they suggest some rotation that would alleviate the pressure on those frontline workers. They're looking also at ways to close units. And one suggestion they have, and I don't know if we fully thought it out and may have to be balanced with the public's demand for increased accountability. But one suggestion from a member in this discussion was that there be an audit of what they call the interrupts, or the folks who are in jail because they violated their furlough. That might be a place where we could alleviate some of the demand and close some units in order to bring down pressure on staff. Now, that also has to be balanced with the fact that that increases pressure on the field, and it also may not meet the public's demand for accountability when it comes to folks who have committed crime. I think there's a number of other things that are maybe less obvious to the legislature that the legislature could do. And incidentally, from our members' perspective, there is no other issue as critical as this issue currently in the Department of Corrections. There's no other issue that is as important as this issue, solving the staffing crisis. And it requires the attention of both the committees of jurisdiction on corrections and the committees on government operations. And that's because we have to make sure there's no policy issue that's more impactful on the goals of the state in terms of criminal justice reform, in terms of accountability for the public, than the staffing crisis we currently face. And it requires all hands on deck. Reviewing exit interviews to see why people said they were leaving. Mostly, I will tell you, it's because of the lack of work-life balance. That's mostly why people are leaving. We would call on the legislative committees to hold at least 8 hours a week of testimony on this issue so that the commissioner feels the pressure to act every single week until this problem is solved. And he knows, and the governor knows, that the legislators are coming with questions about what was done last week to solve this crisis, what's going to be done next week to solve this crisis. It has to move to the front of the burner. It has to be treated like the urgent matter that it is. And I think our members would just ask, in light of the power and the influence that you have, that you stand solidly with the workers in this crisis, that you believe them when they testify about what they're facing. And we have had, many, many members come on their days off, their precious days off, to plead for help with the governor, with the commissioner, with the legislature, with the public. So we ask you to stand solidly on their side. And there are some small things that you could do. You could ask for a meeting with the governor, and you could ask the governor what his plan is to address these growing vacancies in the Department of Corrections. I'm sure he would be willing to meet with you. You could help us get the family members of the Department of Corrections employees in front of the governor. On December 23rd, we're very excited. We are bringing for the first time the spouses and the children of our members in the Department of Corrections to meet with the Secretary of Administration, Sarah Clark, who we have a great deal of respect for and who we really like, to really tell her what the impact on their family has been of the 16-hour shifts and the impact on their loved one has been on the pressure that is building on them personally from the stress of this unbelievable amount of overtime that they're being asked to work. I don't know, the governor, when he ran for lieutenant governor, he did a lot of those on-the-job sort of moments where he did work. Maybe he could visit a correctional facility. Maybe he could work a 16-hour shift and see what it's like. Maybe that would be helpful for him to understand the gravity of the situation that we're in. I think mostly what our members would ask you to do is to not be neutral, to not be silent, to be vocal, to be aggressive, to stand with us. And we don't know that any of that's going to work, but it's better to have more people pulling in the same direction than not. And I think finally, We've demanded a second statewide labor management meeting with the commissioner. We had one in September. Our members have asked for a follow-up one to see what the commissioner's plan is. And we're hopeful that he will come with specific recommendations today and specific recommendations when we finally get that meeting. And maybe you could encourage him to get that meeting scheduled so that he can hear from 12 leading correctional staff from across the state. He can look them in their eyes and see what they're going through, but also communicate with them what his plan as their leader is to solve this problem. And I really appreciate this opportunity, and I'm going to be leaving here to travel to Southern State to sit with our members in a labor management meeting with the leadership team, the management team of that facility. And as I said earlier, with a 41% vacancy rate, I know that I'm going to be there at a time when all of us are preparing for the holidays and it's a festive season. But I will walk out of there knowing that our members probably aren't going to have the same holiday that you and I are going to have, because they're going to be working a 16-hour shift in a seriously, dangerously understaffed facility. I really thank you for the opportunity to testify. I appreciate your accommodating my schedule, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Steve. And I've written down some of the recommends, and I'm interpreting these as recommends, and I'm just going to list them. Increase in pay and benefits, increase in childcare opportunities, putting managers from central office on the front lines, align Group G with that of Group C, which would take legislative initiative, rotations during shifts, particularly for folks who are working in the mental health unit, for them to shift out of there during part of their scheduled shift. Looking at folks who have violated conditions of furlough, do they really need to be incarcerated? If we could bring down the number of folks who are incarcerated, could we close a unit? A strategy or a process in terms of who and how we review exit interviews. Those are some of the things that I've heard. I do have a question in terms of those that need legislative work and statute change, particularly aligning Group G with Group C. Have you been working with folks to submit a draft request to introduce legislation to do that?
Yes. In fact, and Tom Abdelnour is there in the room and he can correct me. I believe last year, Representative Morris from Springfield introduced the bill. And I believe Representative Mahosky, maybe I'm wrong about that, in the Senate introduced the bill, and we'll be seeking, asking them to do that again. Maybe I may have the senator wrong, but
that's correct. Steve, yes, please.
That's correct. Okay.
Right.
So we'll be asking them to do that again.
And I would also think your pay and benefits are connected to the classification levels of CO1s and CO2s that may need to be changed. So that may need also legislation and a bill draft to do that.
I don't know if it's as much about classification, and we have just gone through the period, but we'll start again this summer, of reclassifications and class action reclassifications. I think it's more about getting to the table to discuss an additional side letter. And we're not asking the legislature to get involved in any of that bargaining. We're not asking the legislature to do that at all. But we are asking to use your power and your influence and your persuasion to get the governor to do that.
Questions?
I have one quick question. Good morning, Steve. I just have one question in reference to the feedback from the corrections staff. Maybe you can expound upon the Springfield facility where it states the minute you took away overtime after 8 hours, everyone was walking out on that. How can a state take away overtime after 8 hours? Isn't that an FLSA standard?
So no, in the last collective bargaining agreement, the most controversial piece of that agreement which was a proposal by the administration, accepted by the VSEA as part of that whole package. The overtime class changed from 8 hours in a day and 40 hours in a week to 12 hours in a day and 60 hours in a week. And while there was an $11 million additional investment in salary and wages for the unit, that is, I would say, fair to say, a controversial change. And that has caused a lot of people to, look elsewhere, mostly because a 12-hour shift is really a 16-hour shift. And one of the things I just want to point out that our members also wanted me to say is when you look at mandatory overtime versus voluntary overtime, you can't really trust the numbers there, because what our members will do when they know the staffing levels, they know the holes in the schedule, they will volunteer for the overtime so that they can choose their post. So otherwise they would be mandated and they wouldn't get to choose their post. So when someone says, well, the mandatory overtime is not as big as it really, what Steve says or what VSEA says, mostly it's because our members are choosing to work the overtime. So because they know they're going to be mandated and they want to choose their post.
So speaking of overtime, Steve, have members weighed in at all thinking if someone is, and people are working overtime, that overtime could be calculated towards their retirement?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of that, Madam Chair.
So they're working overtime. Has there been any discussion with your members in terms of looking into proposing or supporting if when they're working overtime, that overtime could get calculated towards their retirement?
You mean towards their service credit?
Yes.
It has come up, and I think it is. I think it is an issue that I think has some support. One thing that we have introduced legislation in the past, and we will be doing it again this year. In fact, we'll be trying to work with the treasurer to find the money for the experience studies to at least exempt from the anti-spiking law that we support. We don't want people spiking their pensions, but to at least exempt from that calculation mandatory overtime. Although it won't be a true reflection of all of the overtime that members work, we do believe that when there is mandatory overtime, you shouldn't be punished in your retirement because you answered the call either during COVID or during a staffing crisis.
Questions? Statements from the committee? Tom, do you want to weigh in at all while you're here?
Madam Chair, I appreciate the opportunity, but I think Steve has summarized the state of affairs very well and very succinctly and found that there's anything I can add.
Anything else, Steve?
No, I think I'll leave it at that, and I wish you all a Merry Christmas and Happy Holiday.
Great, thank you.